My name is Valith Shoran. I hold the rank of commander in the Draveni 3rd Armada, or rather, I held it, because by the time you read this, I will have resigned my commission, and I will spend whatever years remain in my life, making sure nobody in the Empire is foolish enough to repeat what we did. This is not a war story. This is a warning. I was aboard the command ship in orbit when the reports came screaming through the comms channel, and even from that distance, through the static and the noise, I could hear something in the voices of our ground troops that I had never heard before. They were afraid. That should have been impossible. The Draveni have conquered 40 species across 3 galactic corridors. Our soldiers train from the age of 6. Our scales can deflect light projectile fire. Our venom can paralyze most carbon-based organisms within seconds. We are not a species that knows fear, and yet there it was, raw and real, bleeding through every transmission from the planet below. Let me go back to the beginning, because you need to understand how confident we were. We had arrived at the Arathis system 11 days earlier. 12 warships, 2,000 ground soldiers, standard subjugation protocol. Our long-range sensors had identified the colony months before. A small settlement on the 4th planet, roughly 800 inhabitants. The species called themselves humans. We had almost no data on them. They were not part of any known alliance. They had no significant military presence in the region. Their technology was modest. They were, by every measure we used, an easy target. High Marshal Corvan commanded the fleet from the bridge of his flagship, the Burning Thorn, and I served as his second. Corvan was old guard Draveni, the kind of officer who had built his career on the bones of conquered worlds. He looked at the scanner readings of the human colony, and he actually laughed. I remember the sound of it. It was the laugh of someone who believed he already owned the thing in front of him. The humans sent a message within an hour of our arrival. We are a civilian settlement. We have no military assets. We request dialogue before any further approach. Corvan did not respond. He ordered the ground assault. We landed 3 deployment craft on the outskirts of the colony, just before midday. I watched the operation from the tactical display aboard the Burning Thorn, tracking our troops as they spread across the terrain. The colony sat in the middle of a vast agricultural plain, fields of some golden crop stretching in every direction, with clusters of low buildings at the center. There were no walls, no gun emplacements, no shield generators. It looked like exactly what it was: a farm. Our soldiers moved in. The humans did not fight. They retreated to the central buildings and sealed the doors. Some of them ran into the fields. I watched the thermal signatures scatter like seeds thrown by wind. Corvan gave the order to round them up. By mid-afternoon, we had taken roughly 200 prisoners. I reviewed the field reports and studied the images of the humans being led out of their shelters. They were smaller than us, soft-bodied, with no natural armor, and no visible weapons. Some of them were shaking. Several of the younger ones were crying. I have since learned the human word for it. It is called defiance. Corvan was pleased. He told me this would be finished by morning. I had no reason to doubt him. Then the sun went down. I need to explain something about the Draveni. We are cold-blooded. Our body temperature is regulated by our environment. In warm conditions, we are fast, strong, and sharp. In cold conditions, we slow down. Our reflexes dull. Our muscles stiffen. We carry thermal regulators. We deploy heat generators around our camps. We plan for the cold. We did not plan for what the humans did with it. The temperature on Arathis 4 dropped 15 degrees within 2 hours of sunset. Our ground troops activated their thermal units and settled in for a quiet night. The perimeter was set. Sentries were posted. Everything was in order. At 2200 hours, the first sentry post went silent. No distress call. No weapons fire. Just silence. The second post went dark 4 minutes later. Then the third. just gone, as if the planet had swallowed them. Corvan ordered a patrol to investigate. 12 soldiers moved toward the last known position of the first sentry post. Their helmet cameras showed nothing but darkness, and the tall stalks of the human crop swaying in the wind. Then a sound, a soft sound, like something moving through the grain. Then the camera feed cut to static. It was a detonation that ripped through our forward base with enough force to send debris into the upper atmosphere. I saw the flash from orbit. Our damage assessment team later determined that the device was constructed from agricultural fertilizer compounds, the same chemicals the humans use to grow their crops. They had turned their own farming supplies into a weapon, and they had done it in less than 10 hours. After the blast, the shooting started. Not organized fire. Not military tactics as we understood them. It was chaos, but it was a specific kind of chaos, the kind that worked. Shots came from the fields, from the rooftops, from drainage ditches. Our soldiers would turn to face one threat, and another would appear behind them. The humans moved through the darkness like they had been born in it, and for our troops, sluggish and stiff in the dropping temperature, every movement was a fraction too slow. By midnight, I had counted 18 separate engagements across the colony perimeter. Our soldiers were fighting farmers. They were fighting engineers who had repurposed construction tools into projectile launchers. They were fighting a retired schoolteacher named George Whitley, though I did not learn his name until much later. He was 63 years old, and he organized the entire defense from a root cellar beneath the colony's main hall using a handheld radio and a paper map. I want you to understand this. These were not soldiers. They had no training, no armor, no military-grade weapons. They had chemistry knowledge, farming equipment, and the absolute refusal to lie down and accept what was happening to them. They were beaten by people who grew grain for a living. Corvan was furious. He paced the bridge of the burning thorn, and his tail cracked against the deck plating with every step. He ordered an orbital bombardment of the outer fields to destroy the humans' cover. Then he called for reinforcements from the regional fleet. It was short, tight-beamed, and aimed at deep space. It had slipped through our blockade in the 3-second window between our satellite passes. The humans had timed it perfectly. Dreth decoded the message and displayed it on the bridge screen. It read as follows. This is Arathis 4. We are under attack. Colony under siege. 800 civilians. Send everyone. I stared at that message for a long time after the bridge had moved on to other matters. 2 words stuck in my mind and would not let go. Send everyone. Not send help. Not send ships. Not send the military. Send everyone. I did not understand what that meant, not then, but I wrote it down in my personal log because something about it made the scales on the back of my neck rise, and in 3,000 years of Draveni instinct, that response has only ever meant one thing. Something dangerous is coming. They had achieved faster-than-light travel, relatively recently by galactic standards, and had begun colonizing nearby worlds with the eager clumsiness of a young species stepping into a large universe. Their physical profiles were unimpressive. No claws, no venom, no natural armor. Their skin was thin, and it tore easily. They had flat teeth, designed for chewing plants, and cooked meat, not for combat. Their senses were average at best. On paper, they were one of the least threatening species I had ever examined. And yet 60 of my people were dead. I pulled up the helmet camera footage from the night engagements and watched it frame by frame. I watched a human female, later identified as a woman named Emma Bright, crawl through a drainage channel with a makeshift incendiary device strapped to her back. She moved for 40 minutes through freezing water in total darkness, reached a Draveni supply depot, placed the device, and crawled back out. Her body temperature when she emerged was low enough that she should have been in shock. She was shivering so hard she could barely walk, but she triggered the detonator, and she watched the depot burn, and then she disappeared back into the fields. I watched a group of 4 humans, 2 men and 2 women, attack a Draveni patrol of 10 soldiers. They used nothing but farming tools and improvised clubs. They lost one of their own in the first exchange. The other three did not retreat. They did not even hesitate. They pressed forward, screaming, and they overwhelmed the patrol through sheer aggression that our soldiers simply could not process. The Draveni are predators. We are accustomed to prey that runs. These humans did not run. They attacked harder. I turned off the footage and sat in the dim light of my quarters. Outside the viewport, the planet turned slowly below us. Down there, in the darkness between the fields and the fire, 800 farmers were fighting an empire. I thought about what our prisoner profiles had shown. The crying, the shaking, the fear in their eyes. I had assumed that meant they were weak. I was beginning to understand that I had made a terrible mistake. The fear was real. They were genuinely terrified. But they fought anyway. That was the part I could not process. In every other species we had conquered, fear led to submission. Fear was the tool we used. Show them your strength. Let them feel the weight of what they faced, and they would fold. It had worked 40 times before. These creatures felt the fear, and then they did the opposite of folding. They felt the fear, and they used it as fuel. I made a note in my log. I wrote, "I do not think we are dealing with a normal species." Then I tried to sleep. I could not. The reinforcements arrived the next morning. 20 additional warships from the regional fleet dropped into the system in perfect formation and took up positions alongside our original 12. Corvan greeted their commander with satisfaction and immediately began planning the next phase of the ground assault. I stood on the bridge and watched the new ships settle into orbit. 32 warships, 2,000 fresh troops to add to our forces on the ground. All of this for a farming colony of 800 people. It should have been more than enough. Any rational analysis would tell you it was overkill, and yet as I stared down at that quiet little planet with its golden fields and its burning outposts and its stubborn, impossible people, I could not shake the feeling that we were the ones who were outmatched. I did not know how right I was. Not yet. But I would learn. We all would. 3 days passed. 3 days of grinding, ugly ground combat that should never have lasted 3 hours. Our reinforced troops pushed into the colony center. They used armored vehicles and air support and thermal scanning to root out the human defenders position by position. For every building we took, the humans fell back to the next one. For every tunnel we sealed, they dug another. They were relentless in a way that defied every tactical model we had. On the second day, one of our assault teams breached the colony's central hall. Inside, they found 43 humans, mostly elderly and children, who had been sheltered there since the siege began. They were hungry, dehydrated, and exhausted. Our troops moved in to secure them. That was when George Whitley, the retired schoolteacher, triggered the second trap. He had spent 2 days wiring the building's power grid into a feedback loop that turned every wall panel into a conductor. He activated it from his root cellar, and the charge disabled every piece of Draveni equipment in the building. In the chaos that followed, the elderly humans evacuated through a service tunnel that opened into the eastern grain fields. George Whitley stayed behind to hold the switch. He was 63 years old. He had taught children about the stars for 30 years. And he stood alone in a cellar and held off an empire while his neighbors escaped into the dark. We captured him eventually. He did not resist when they pulled him out. He was smiling. I was reviewing the reports from these engagements when Dreth called me to the communications deck. Something had appeared at the edge of the system. A single ship, small, unarmed, broadcasting a diplomatic identification code on an open channel. Corvan was summoned, and he stared at the scanner display with narrowed eyes. "One ship," he said. "What game is this?" The ship requested permission to approach and transmit a message. Corvan, curious despite himself, allowed it. The view screen flickered, and a human appeared. She was a small woman, with dark hair, pulled back from her face, and calm brown eyes that moved across our bridge with careful attention. She wore a plain gray uniform, with no visible weapons and no insignia of rank beyond a small silver pin on her collar. She introduced herself as Ambassador Lucy Ward, representing the United Earth Diplomatic Corps. Her voice was level and precise. High Marshal Corvan, I am here on behalf of the people of Earth and her colonies. You are currently engaged in hostile action against a civilian settlement that falls under our protection. I am authorized to offer terms for a peaceful resolution. Corvan leaned forward. You are authorized, he repeated, tasting the word. By whom? By the government of United Earth. And where is this government? Where are its ships, its armies? Lucy Ward did not blink. They are where they need to be. I am here to ensure they do not need to come closer. I watched her from my station at the side of the bridge, and something about her held my attention. She was not performing confidence. She was not bluffing. There was a stillness to her that reminded me of the deep-water predators on our homeworld, the ones that sat motionless on the ocean floor and waited with absolute patience until their prey swam close enough. Corvan assigned me as liaison for the diplomatic exchange. I think he considered it a minor task, a way to keep the human occupied while he continued the ground campaign. He did not take her seriously. That was his first mistake with Lucy Ward. It would not be his last. We met in a conference room aboard the Burning Thorn. 2 Draveni guards stood by the door. Lucy Ward walked in alone, sat down, folded her hands on the table, and looked at me as if she had all the time in the universe. Commander Shoran, she said. Thank you for meeting with me. I had not told her my name. She had obtained it from our broadcast protocols, which meant she or her people had been monitoring our communications since they arrived. That small detail sat in my mind like a splinter. Ambassador Ward, I replied. You understand that your presence here changes nothing. This system has been claimed by the Draveni Empire. She asked questions that seemed casual, but were designed to map our command structure, our supply lines, our objectives. She referenced Draveni history and customs with an accuracy that should not have been possible for a species we had never encountered before. She had studied us, and she had done it thoroughly. But what disturbed me most was not her mind. It was her body. I had accessed her ship's medical broadcast, the automated health telemetry that all diplomatic vessels transmitted as a sign of good faith. Her blood chemistry showed elevated stress markers and the early signs of dehydration. By Draveni standards, she should have been impaired, sluggish, making mistakes. She was none of those things. Her responses were sharp. Her eyes tracked every movement in the room. When one of our guards shifted his weight behind her, she registered the sound and adjusted her posture without breaking eye contact with me. It was subtle, but it was the reaction of something that knew, at a deep and primal level, how to monitor threats in its environment. At one point during our discussion, the guard nearest the door moved too quickly. He was adjusting his weapon on its strap, a routine gesture, but it created a sudden motion in Lucy Ward's peripheral vision. What happened next took less than a second. She pushed back from the table, dropped her center of gravity, and brought one hand up in a defensive position. Then she recognized the motion for what it was, relaxed, and sat back down. The Dravini are fast, faster than most species we have encountered, but Lucy Ward had moved with a quickness that I had not expected from a diplomat with no military training. I excused myself and went to the ship's data archive. I pulled every file we had on human biology. What I found kept me reading for hours, and with every page, the cold feeling in my chest grew deeper. They hunted by chasing. They would pick a target and follow it, not in a sprint, but in a steady, unrelenting pursuit that lasted hours, sometimes days. They ran their prey to exhaustion, and then they closed in. The prey died not from the attack, but from the simple, horrifying fact that the humans never stopped coming. Their bodies were designed for damage. They healed from injuries that would cripple most species. Their blood contained a clotting mechanism that could seal wounds in minutes. Their skeletal structure could fracture, repair itself, and come back stronger. They consumed toxins recreationally, chemicals like ethanol and capsaicin that would harm other organisms, and their systems processed them without permanent damage. They had a chemical response called adrenaline. Under threat, their bodies flooded with it, and it did things that should not have been biologically possible. It increased their strength, their speed, their pain tolerance. There were documented cases of humans lifting objects many times their own body weight under its influence. It turned ordinary individuals into something far beyond ordinary, and it was triggered automatically by danger. And perhaps most unsettling of all, they were warm-blooded. I brought this information to Corvan. I presented it clearly and without emotion. He listened. Then he waved his hand. Interesting biology, he said. But biology does not win wars. Ships win wars. Armies win wars. They sent one diplomat in one unarmed ship. That tells me everything I need to know about their strength. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that the diplomat in the unarmed ship was the most frightening part of all, because it meant the humans were so confident in what was behind her that they did not need to show it yet. But Corvan was my superior, and I had given my counsel. There was nothing more I could do. I returned to the conference room for a final session with Lucy Ward. She was standing by the viewport, looking down at the planet. The fires from our bombardment were visible, as orange dots scattered across the dark side of the world. "Your people are still fighting," I said. "Yes," she replied. "They will keep fighting." "Commander," she said, "in our history, there was a battle at a place called Thermopylae. A small group of soldiers held a narrow pass against an army that outnumbered them beyond counting. They fought until every one of them was gone. They did not win the battle, but they did not need to. They needed to hold the line long enough for the rest of us to arrive." She paused and let the words settle. Then she said, "I was sent here to give you a chance. You have made your decision. What comes next is not my department." She gathered her things and walked to the door. At the threshold, she stopped and looked back at me. "You seem like a thoughtful officer, Commander Shoran. When this is over, I hope you will be the one writing the report. Someone needs to tell your people the truth about what happened here." Then she left. Her ship departed the system 20 minutes later. I stood alone in the conference room, and I thought about what she had said. The Battle of Thermopylae, a small group holding the line until the rest arrived. The rest. I walked to the bridge, and I checked the deep space sensors myself. There was nothing out there. Empty space in every direction. No ships, no signals, no movement. I have since learned that humans have a concept called a warning. It is a courtesy they extend before they act. They tell you what is coming. They give you the chance to step back. And if you do not take that chance, they consider their obligation fulfilled. We had received our warning. We did not listen. 4 days after Lucy Ward's departure, the full might of the Draveni Third Armada arrived in the Arathis system. I stood on the observation deck of the Burning Thorn and watched them come. Ship after ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, their hulls gleaming with the dark metallic sheen of Draveni engineering. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and at the center of the formation, 3 heavy battleships, each one capable of reducing a continent to glass. 112 warships in total. The pride of our regional command. The force that had broken the Kelathari Confederacy in 6 days and brought the Morden Collective to its knees without firing a single orbital round. There was no species in our galactic corridor that had stood against the Third Armada and survived. His voice carried across every ship on the encrypted command frequency, steady and full of the old Draveni certainty that had carried our empire for 3,000 years. The Third Armada has been assembled to secure the Arathis system and pacify its inhabitants. This is a minor operation against a minor species. We will finish what we started, and we will do so in a manner that sends a message to every other young civilization that might consider resisting the reach of the Draveni Empire. Begin orbital suppression immediately. Our ships targeted every structure outside the central colony zone. Storage facilities, water processing plants, communication towers, equipment sheds. We burned the infrastructure that the colonists needed to survive, and we did it with the cold efficiency that had defined Draveni military doctrine for centuries. On the ground, our reinforced troops pushed deeper into the colony. With the additional soldiers and armored support from the Armada, the humans were forced back into a shrinking perimeter around the central buildings. Their improvised defenses crumbled under sustained fire. Their supply of homemade explosives ran out. The night raids that had cost us so dearly in the first days became less frequent as the humans ran out of materials, out of hiding places, out of room to maneuver. But they did not stop. That was the thing that none of our tactical officers could explain. By every rational measure, the fight was over. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded, and cut off from any possibility of resupply or reinforcement. Any other species would have surrendered. The Kelethari had surrendered when we destroyed their orbital stations. The Morden had surrendered when we blockaded their homeworld. Surrender was the logical response to an unwinnable situation. The humans did not appear to operate on logic alone. On the 5th day of the Armada's presence, I received authorization from Korvan to interrogate a newly captured human prisoner. The ground teams had taken him during a skirmish near the colony's water reclamation facility. He had been part of a group of 6 defenders who had held the facility for 3 days against repeated Draveni assaults. When he was captured, he was the last one standing. The other 5 had fought until they physically could not continue. His name was Nathan Perry. He was 20 years old. He was a farmer's son who had been helping his father manage the eastern grain plots when we arrived. He had no military training, no combat experience, and no particular skill with weapons. He was, by every standard I could apply, an ordinary young human. They brought him to the interrogation room aboard our ground command post, a prefabricated structure we had erected near the colony perimeter. He was seated in a metal chair, his hands bound, his face marked with dust and dried blood from a cut above his left eye. He was thin and tired and clearly frightened. His hands trembled against the restraints. I sat across from him and studied his face. He looked back at me with wide eyes, and I could see the fear in them, open and undisguised. He was not trying to hide it. "Nathan Perry," I said. "Age 20, agricultural worker, no military affiliation." He said nothing. "You have been fighting for 9 days against a force that outnumbers your entire colony population by a factor of 6. Your leadership has been captured or scattered. There is no scenario in which you prevail. He still said nothing. His jaw was tight, and I could see the muscles working beneath the skin. I am not asking you for tactical information, I continued. Your tactical situation is irrelevant to me. I already know the layout of your defenses, the location of your remaining fighters, and the condition of your supplies. I am asking you a different question. I leaned forward. Why are you still fighting? He looked at me for a long moment. The trembling in his hands slowed. Something shifted in his expression, a settling, as if a decision had been made somewhere deep inside him. Yes, it is. He swallowed hard. You could surrender. You could live. I could live on my knees in a cage. He shook his head. My dad used to tell me something. He said you do not have to win a fight. You just have to make it cost more than it is worth. I wrote that down. Those words, I wrote them in my personal log, and I underlined them 3 times, because in that moment, I understood something about humans that all our scanners and databases and biological profiles had failed to capture. They did not fight because they thought they could win. They fought because fighting was, to them, the only response to what was happening. It was not strategy. It was not calculation. It was something deeper than either of those things. It was identity. They were a species that defined itself by what it refused to accept. I ended the interrogation and returned to the burning thorn. I filed my report with a recommendation that we reconsider our approach to the Arathis system. Corvan read it and dismissed it. They are farmers, Valeth, he said. Brave farmers, perhaps, but farmers nonetheless. 2 days later, the deep space sensors detected incoming faster than light signatures. Dreth was the first to see them. He was monitoring the long-range arrays when the readings began to spike, and the sound he made, a low hiss of disbelief, brought me to his station at a run. How many? I asked. His fingers moved across the controls. The display updated. He looked at me, and his pupils had contracted to thin vertical slits, the Draveni expression of shock. 47, he said. 47 ships. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a formation so tight and so precise that our targeting systems initially classified them as a single massive object before the resolution corrected. They appeared at the system's edge, roughly 4 light minutes from our position, and they stopped. They did not advance. They did not scatter. They simply appeared, arranged themselves in a pattern that our tactical computers identified as an offensive crescent, and waited. These were not the smooth, elegant vessels of a sophisticated empire. They were angular, heavy, and thick-hulled. Their armor plating was layered and dense, designed not for speed or maneuverability, but for raw endurance. They looked like machines that had been built by people who expected to absorb punishment, and who had decided, long before the first shot was fired, that they would keep going regardless. Every surface was functional. There were no decorative elements, no ceremonial markings, no aesthetic considerations at all. These ships existed for one purpose, and that purpose was written in every weld line and every gun port and every reinforced structural beam. They were tools built for war, by a species that approached war the same way they approached everything else, with patient, methodical, unstoppable determination. A transmission came through on the open channel, a man's voice, deep and steady, speaking with the same calm precision that Lucy Ward had shown, but carrying beneath it something harder, something with edges. You are engaged in hostile action against a protected Earth colony. I am ordering you to cease fire, release all prisoners, and withdraw from this system immediately. He paused. Then he added 4 words that landed on the bridge of the burning thorn, like stones dropped into still water. Release our people, now. Corvan stared at the view screen. For the first time since I had served under him, he did not respond immediately. The silence stretched for 5 long seconds. Then he straightened, set his jaw, and opened the fleet-wide channel. All ships, battle formation. Target the human fleet. We outnumber them 2 to 1. This ends now. The human fleet advanced in a wide formation, their ships spreading apart to present multiple targeting solutions, while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. Our fleet moved to meet them in the standard Draveni engagement pattern, a central mass with flanking elements designed to envelop and crush the enemy. The first exchange was devastating. Both sides fired at maximum range, filling the space between the fleets with streams of energy and kinetic projectiles. Our weapons hit their targets. I watched the sensor readings and confirmed impacts on multiple human ships. Direct hits, solid connections, damage that should have been significant. The human ships kept coming. Their armor absorbed the fire. Plating shattered and peeled away, and the hulls beneath showed scorch marks and fractures. But the ships did not stop. They did not slow. They pushed through our initial barrage and closed the distance with an aggression that our fleet commanders had never encountered. Then, they began to fire back. Human weapons technology was different from ours. Where the Draveni favored precision energy weapons designed for surgical strikes, the humans used a combination of kinetic slugs, guided missiles, and a type of directed particle beam that I had never seen before. Their doctrine was not about elegance or accuracy, it was about volume. They threw everything they had at us, from every angle, in a continuous rolling barrage that never let up. I watched the battle unfold from the tactical display aboard the Burning Thorn. The humans flew their ships in ways that should have been impossible. Their maneuvers pulled gravitational forces that would have rendered any Draveni crew unconscious. They changed direction at speeds that our targeting systems could not track. They used the debris from damaged ships, both ours and theirs, as cover, weaving through fields of shattered metal with a reckless precision that was almost beautiful. When their ships took critical damage, they did not withdraw. One human frigate, its engines failing, and its hull breached in 3 places, accelerated directly into the path of a Draveni cruiser and detonated its remaining munitions at point-blank range. The cruiser's shields collapsed and its forward section crumpled like paper. Both ships were destroyed. I checked the crew manifest for that frigate later. 42 humans. They had known what they were doing. They had chosen it. A human destroyer, crippled and drifting, used its last functional thrusters to position itself directly in the firing line of our flagship, absorbing 3 shots that would have hit the Burning Thorn's engine section. The destroyer broke apart under the impact. Its crew of 60 had used their dying ship as a shield for their allies. In 6 hours of combat, the Draveni Third Armada lost 31 ships. The humans lost 14. They had fewer ships, smaller ships, less advanced technology, and they were winning. Not winning through superior firepower, not winning through technological advantage, winning through the simple, relentless refusal to stop. Every ship we destroyed cost us something in return. Every engagement left our forces weaker, and their resolve unchanged. They fought with a ferocity that went beyond training, beyond discipline, beyond anything I had ever seen in 40 years of military service. Corvan watched the battle turn against him, and his composure finally cracked. He ordered a retreat to a defensive perimeter and opened an emergency communication channel to the Draveni homeworld. The message he sent was classified at the highest level. He had called for backup. Every warship the Draveni Empire possessed. As I watched the communication beams streak toward deep space, I thought about Nathan Perry's words. You do not have to win a fight. You just have to make it cost more than it is worth. I thought about Lucy Ward's calm eyes and her story about soldiers holding a narrow pass. I thought about the message the colonists had sent 9 days earlier, send everyone. And I realized, with a clarity that froze the blood in my veins, that we were not the only ones who had called for backup. The Grand Fleet arrived 11 days later. I had spent those 11 days in a state of suspended dread, watching the standoff between our battered armada and the human second response group play out in slow, tense orbits around Arathis 4. Neither side had engaged since Corvan's retreat. The humans had established a defensive perimeter around the colony, their scarred warships arranged in overlapping arcs that covered every approach vector. Admiral Okafor had not sent another transmission. He did not need to. His fleet's position said everything. On the ground, the remaining colonists had emerged from their shelters. Our troops had pulled back to the landing zones under an unspoken ceasefire, and through our surveillance feeds, I watched the humans begin to rebuild. They cleared debris, they patched walls, they tended to their wounded. I accessed every human cultural database that our intelligence division had managed to intercept, and I read about their history with a growing sense of something I can only describe as awe laced with horror. These were a people who had spent their entire existence fighting, not just other species, each other. Their own recorded history was a catalog of conflicts spanning millennia. Wars fought over territory, over resources, over ideas, over differences so small that an outside observer could barely detect them. They had invented weapons capable of destroying their own planet, and then they had pointed those weapons at each other, and somehow, through some combination of luck and last-second restraint, they had survived. They had survived plagues that killed fractions of their total population. They had survived ice ages, famines, and natural disasters that reshaped their continents. They had survived their own technology, their own anger, and their own capacity for destruction. Every challenge that should have ended them had instead made them harder, more adaptable, more stubbornly determined to continue existing. And through all of it, through every war and every catastrophe, and every moment when the rational response would have been to lie down and accept the end, they had kept going. Not because they were the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced, because they simply refused to stop. I closed the files and stared at the wall of my quarters, and I understood, in that moment, that the Draveni had made an error that no amount of firepower could correct. We had not invaded a colony. We had poked a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history learning how to survive things that should have destroyed it. They came from the direction of the Draveni homeworld, a wall of metal and energy that filled the scanner displays from edge to edge. Battleships, carriers, destroyers, and support vessels in a formation so massive that our sensors needed several minutes to process the full scope of it. At the center of the formation flew the Throne of Scales, the personal flagship of Grand Admiral Thesic, the highest-ranking military officer in the Draveni Empire. Grand Admiral Thesic was not like Corvan. Where Corvan was aggressive and proud, Thesic was cold, methodical, and absolutely without mercy. He had commanded the Grand Fleet for 40 years, and in that time, he had never lost a battle. He did not make speeches. He did not posture. He arrived, he assessed, and he destroyed. That was his method, and it had never failed. 300 warships. Combined with our remaining forces, the Draveni now had over 350 combat vessels in the Arathis system, against the humans' 47. Corvan was transformed. The doubt and frustration that had plagued him since the first night on Arathis 4 vanished like frost under a heat lamp. He stood on the bridge of the Burning Thorn, and he looked out at the Grand Fleet, and I could see in his eyes the absolute certainty that the matter was settled. "Now," he said, "now we finish this." "Human vessels, you are outnumbered by a factor of 7. You will power down your weapons and surrender your ships immediately. Non-compliance will result in total destruction." We decline, as if a fleet of 300 warships was an inconvenience rather than an execution. They did not scatter. They tightened their formation around Arathis IV, pulling closer to the planet, and they turned their guns outward in every direction. 47 ships, battered and scarred from the previous battle, preparing to face an armada that could obliterate them several times over. Then the faster-than-light sensors began to scream. Not from one direction, from everywhere. The signatures came from 7 different approach vectors simultaneously, lighting up the scanner displays like a cascade of falling sparks. Dreth's hands moved across his controls and his voice cracked as he reported the readings. Multiple FTL contacts. Bearing 015, 090, 170, 225, 270, 315, 360. I am reading hundreds of signatures. Hundreds. They dropped in from every direction, ships of every size and description, and as the sensor resolution sharpened and the tactical computers began to classify them, I felt the ground shift beneath everything I thought I understood about how the universe worked. They were not military vessels, not most of them. They were cargo haulers with welded armor plating and improvised weapon mounts. They were mining barges with drilling lasers repurposed as cutting beams. They were passenger transports with missile racks bolted to their hulls. They were personal yachts and family shuttles and commercial freighters and industrial tugs and research vessels and a luxury liner, an actual luxury liner, with torpedo tubes protruding from its observation deck. Teachers and miners and shopkeepers and engineers and farmers and students and retirees. People who had heard that 800 strangers on a distant colony were under attack, and who had responded by climbing into whatever vessel they could find, welding whatever weapons they could scrounge onto its frame, and flying across the void to help. I stared at the tactical display, and I could not comprehend what I was seeing. In Draveni culture, war was the domain of warriors. Civilians did not fight. They were protected, or they were conquered, but they did not pick up arms and fly into battle. The concept was as foreign to me as breathing water. But here they were, hundreds of ordinary humans in ships that had no business being in a combat zone, arranged in a rough sphere around the entire Draveni Grand Fleet. Some of their ships were so small that our weapon systems classified them as debris. Some were so old that their hull integrity ratings would have failed a basic Draveni safety inspection. Some were broadcasting music on open channels, human songs that I could not identify, as if they wanted us to hear them singing as they prepared to fight. I learned later what had happened. The distress call from Arathis IV had reached human communication networks, and it had spread the way fire spreads through dry ground, fast and unstoppable, and beyond anyone's control. Communities had organized. Factories had shifted production to ammunition and armor plating. Shipyards had worked around the clock. A generation ship, a massive vessel carrying 10,000 humans on a decades-long journey to a new world, had changed course. Retired veterans who had not worn a uniform in 20 years had dusted off their equipment and reported to the nearest recruitment center. Parents had sent their children to safety stations and then turned their personal vessels toward Arathis IV. All of it for strangers. People they had never met, on a planet they had never visited, in a system they could not find on a map without help. The whole species had moved, not because someone ordered them to, not because a government compelled them, because somewhere in the fundamental architecture of what it meant to be human, there was a line that read, "We do not leave our own behind." I was still processing this when the last faster-than-light signature appeared. It was a single contact, massive, so large that the sensors initially classified it as an asteroid or a small moon before the resolution corrected and the true reading came through. It dropped into the system from above the orbital plane, alone, and as it decelerated and its profile resolved on our displays, the bridge of the burning thorn went completely silent. Larger than any vessel in the Draveni fleet, it was nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull a mountain of layered armor and weapons arrays and sensor clusters that gave it the appearance of a creature rather than a machine. It was not beautiful. It was not elegant. It was a monument to the simple philosophy of building something so powerful and so resilient that the universe itself could not kill it. Its identification beacon broadcast a single designation, UEN Colossus, Dreadnought class, first of its kind. I learned afterward that the Colossus was not supposed to be operational for another 8 months. It had been under construction in a shipyard orbiting Earth's moon when the call from Arathis 4 reached home. The construction crews had worked in shifts that no safety regulation would have allowed, around the clock without rest, pushing the schedule forward with a desperate energy that bordered on mania. They had finished it in weeks instead of months. The engineering crews had bolted the last armor plate into place, and the ship had launched with a skeleton crew of volunteers who had not slept in days, flying straight from the shipyard to the front line without testing, without trials, without a single shakedown cruise. They had built it faster because people were in trouble. That was all the reason they needed. Admiral Okafor's second transmission cut through the silence on every Draveni bridge in the system. Grand Fleet of the Draveni Empire. You are surrounded. Your numerical advantage is no longer sufficient to guarantee victory. The Draveni Grand Fleet, 350 warships, was now encircled by a combined human force of over 360 vessels, plus the Colossus. The humans had achieved numerical parity and positional superiority in the space of 20 minutes, using civilian ships crewed by volunteers. Grand Admiral Thesic studied the display without expression. Then he opened a channel to Corvan. "High Marshal, assessment." Corvan straightened. "We are the Grand Fleet. We do not retreat from primitives." Thesic looked at the display for a long time. I watched his eyes move across the human positions, tracking the civilian ships, the military vessels, the enormous silhouette of the Colossus hanging above the orbital plane like a judgment. Then he said, "Agreed. All ships, weapons free." My heart sank. The Second Battle of Arathis IV began with fire and ended with silence. And in between, the Draveni Empire learned something it would never forget. Thesic's opening salvo was textbook. 300 warships firing in coordinated volleys, targeting the closest human vessels in calculated patterns, designed to overwhelm shields and armor through concentrated force. It was the same tactic that had shattered every fleet the Draveni had ever faced. Precise, efficient, lethal. It worked against the first few ships. A human cargo hauler, its improvised armor too thin to withstand sustained fire, broke apart under the barrage. A converted mining barge took a direct hit to its engine section and began to drift, venting atmosphere. A small yacht, barely larger than a shuttle, was caught in the crossfire and disintegrated. But the rest did not break. They did not scatter. They did not flee. They surged forward. The civilian fleet attacked the grand fleet of the Draveni Empire, and they did it with a ferocity and creativity that no tactical computer could have predicted, because no tactical computer could model what was happening. There were no tactics. There was no coordinated strategy. There were 300 individual ships, crewed by 300 individual groups of humans, each making their own decisions in real time, responding to the battle as it developed around them, with the instinctive improvisation of a species that had spent its entire history adapting to things that tried to destroy it. A converted freighter captained by a retired merchant sailor named Frank Ellison drove his ship directly into the gap between two Draveni destroyers and opened fire in both directions simultaneously. His weapons were mining charges designed for breaking asteroids. They punched through the destroyer's side armor and detonated inside the hull spaces, tearing both ships apart from within. His own ship took severe damage in the exchange. He kept firing until his weapons were empty, then pulled away on one functioning engine. A passenger transport carrying a crew of university students used its superior speed and small profile to weave through the Draveni formation, drawing fire away from slower civilian vessels. Its pilot, a 22-year-old named Hannah West, flew maneuvers that our targeting systems could not track. She threaded her ship through gaps in our formation that should not have existed, and every time a Draveni gunner locked onto her, she was already somewhere else. She led 7 Draveni escort ships on a chase that lasted 40 minutes, and while they were chasing her, they were not shooting at anyone else. A mining barge, the Honest Labor, crewed by a team of asteroid miners from the Belt colonies, positioned itself directly between a Draveni heavy cruiser and the planet. The cruiser had been targeting the colony with orbital bombardment weapons. The Honest Labor parked in its firing line and absorbed everything the cruiser threw at it. Its captain, a woman named Diane Marsh, broadcast one message to the cruiser commander. "You want to shoot at farmers? You shoot through us first." The Honest Labor held position for over an hour. Its hull was torn open in 6 places. Its crew sealed every breach with emergency patches, and welded metal, and sheer determination. A retired couple named Alan and Margaret Dunn had flown to Arathis 4 in a modified cargo shuttle that was older than most of our junior officers. Their ship had no weapons beyond a single mining laser designed for cutting through rock. They could not fight in any conventional sense, so they did something else. They flew their shuttle into the engine exhaust of a Dravani frigate and used the mining laser to cut through the thrust nozzles. The frigate lost propulsion and began to spin. The Dunn's shuttle was caught in the resulting debris field and thrown clear with heavy damage. Both of them survived. They were 71 and 68 years old. I watched all of this from the tactical display aboard the Burning Thorn, and I watched the numbers change. Our fleet was losing ships. Not quickly, not in the dramatic fashion of the first battle, but steadily, persistently, in a grinding attrition that favored the side willing to absorb the most punishment. And the humans were willing to absorb everything. That was the part I could not wrap my mind around. These were not soldiers. They had no training, no discipline, no chain of command. They were ordinary people in ordinary ships, and they were throwing themselves at the most powerful military fleet in the galactic corridor, because somewhere on the planet below, 800 strangers needed help. I asked myself what would have happened if the situation were reversed. If a Draveni colony had been attacked, would Draveni civilians have come? Would Draveni shopkeepers and teachers and retirees have climbed into cargo ships and flown across the void to fight? I knew the answer. No, they would not. Draveni civilians would have waited for the military. They would have trusted the Empire to handle it. They would have gone about their lives and let the warriors do the fighting. Humans did not think that way. To a human, every member of their species was their responsibility. It was not a government policy. It was not a military doctrine. It was something woven into the fabric of what they were. They could not stand by while their own people suffered. The instinct was deeper than logic, deeper than self-preservation, deeper than fear. And nature does not negotiate. The battle raged for 3 hours before the Colossus finally acted. It had been holding position above the orbital plane, motionless, while the civilian fleet and the naval vessels engaged the Draveni Grand Fleet. I had been watching it on the sensors, waiting for it to move, waiting for it to reveal what it carried, and as the hours passed and it did not fire, I began to wonder if it was simply a bluff, a hollow ship designed to look impressive and nothing more. I was wrong. At the 3-hour mark, Grand Admiral Thesic's flagship, the Throne of Scales, broke through the human perimeter and turned its primary weapons toward the planet. It was going to bypass the fleet entirely and strike the colony directly. If you cannot defeat the enemy's fleet, destroy what they are fighting to protect. Our sensors tracked its acceleration, and the readings were so far outside expected parameters that Dreth initially thought the instruments were malfunctioning. The Colossus fired once. One weapon. A directed gravitational lance. The technology was something our scientists had theorized about, but never successfully developed. It created a focused gravitational distortion, a point of force so intense that it could bend metal the way wind bends grass. The beam struck the throne of scales amidships, the largest warship in the Draveni Empire, the pride of our fleet, the symbol of 3,000 years of military dominance, folded. The hull compressed along the point of impact, buckling inward, as the gravitational forces overwhelmed every structural support. The ship crumpled like something soft and hollow, and then it broke into two pieces that spun away from each other in a shower of metal and light. Grand Admiral Thesic was on that ship. I do not know if he had time to understand what had happened. I hope for his sake that he did not. The Grand Fleet broke. It was the foundation of the empire, the unspoken certainty that undergirded every treaty and every conquest and every political calculation, and it was gone, broken in an instant, by a species we had dismissed as primitive. Ships began to retreat, first the smaller escorts, peeling away from the formation and running for the system's edge, then the cruisers, then the battleships. The retreat was not orderly, it was a rout. Draveni warships fled in every direction, jumping to faster-than-light speed the moment they could calculate a course, not caring where they went as long as it was away. Corvan stood on the bridge of the burning thorn and watched his empire unravel. His scales had gone pale, drained of color, the Draveni equivalent of shock. His hands gripped the railing of the command platform, and he did not move. "High Marshal," I said, "we need to withdraw." He did not answer. "Corvan," I used his name. I had never done that before. It is over. He turned to me, and his eyes were empty. Surrender the ship, he said. I transmitted our surrender on the open channel. Within minutes, the remaining Draveni vessels that had not fled did the same. The Battle of Arathis IV was over. A human boarding team arrived on the Burning Thorn 40 minutes after our surrender. I expected armored soldiers. I expected weapons in our faces and harsh commands, and the rough treatment that the Draveni ourselves would have inflicted on a defeated enemy. He was perhaps 25 years old, with short brown hair and a face that still carried the softness of youth. He looked around the bridge, assessed the situation, and then spoke to me, in a voice that was firm but not hostile. Commander Shoran? Yes. Lieutenant Simon Cross, UEN boarding detail. Your surrender has been accepted. We are going to secure this vessel and begin processing your crew. Nobody will be harmed. Do you have wounded that need medical attention? I stared at him. You are asking about our wounded? Yes. Do you have anyone who needs a medic? I told him that several of our crew had been injured during the battle. He spoke into a device on his wrist, and within 20 minutes, a human medical team was aboard the Burning Thorn, treating Draveni wounded. A woman named Claire Ashton, a field medic with steady hands and kind eyes, cleaned and bandaged the burns on my arm that I had sustained when a console overloaded during the battle. She worked quickly and gently, and when she finished, she looked at me and said, "That should hold until you can get proper treatment. How does it feel?" Nobody had ever treated me with such care after a battle. Not even my own people. It was not a prison, it was a converted passenger ship, and the quarters they gave us were better than the ones we had aboard our own vessels. They fed us. The food was warm and well prepared, adapted to our dietary requirements based on biological data they had gathered. They gave us clean water and access to communication devices so we could contact the Draveni homeworld. I spent the first night aboard the human vessel in a state of bewilderment. I had conquered species. I knew what happened to prisoners of war. I knew because I had overseen it. The Draveni did not treat prisoners the way these humans treated us. On the second day, I was summoned to a meeting with Admiral Okafor. He received me in a conference room aboard his flagship, seated behind a simple desk with a cup of something hot and dark in his hand. He was older than I had expected, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes, and he moved with the careful economy of someone who had been carrying weight for a long time. "Commander Shoran," he said, "sit down." I sat. "I have read your file," he continued. "Your intelligence division did a thorough assessment of the human colony before the invasion. You recommended further study before engagement. High Marshal Corvon overruled you." "We intercepted your internal communications 3 days ago." "No, but you tried." He set the cup down. "Commander, I am not going to lecture you about what your empire did here. You already know. What I want to discuss is what happens next." He laid out the terms. The Draveni would withdraw from the Arathis system permanently. All prisoners, human and Draveni, would be released. The Draveni Empire would enter into formal diplomatic contact with United Earth. There would be no reparations demanded, no territory seized, no punitive measures beyond the withdrawal. Why? You could demand anything. If we punished you, we would create an enemy that would spend the next century planning revenge. We are not interested in any of those things. We want neighbors, not subjects. We want a galaxy where the next time someone sends a distress call, the response comes faster, and from more directions. He paused. We do not want to rule you. We want you to understand that you do not want to fight us. There is a difference. I left that meeting carrying something I had never held before: respect for an enemy. Not the grudging acknowledgement of a powerful opponent, which is what the Draveni call respect. True respect. The recognition that I had encountered something greater than myself. Over the following days, as the diplomatic process unfolded, and the two fleets began the careful process of disengagement, I walked through the human vessels, and I observed. I watched them with the same careful attention that Lucy Ward had watched us, and what I saw completed the picture that had been forming since that first night on Arathis 4. They were exhausted, bruised, and several of them wore bandages over fresh wounds. They were also laughing. One of them had painted a tally mark on the hull for each Draveni ship they had disabled, and the others were arguing about whether the frigate that the Duns had crippled counted as their assist. I saw Hannah West, the student pilot, sitting in a corridor with her back against the wall and her eyes closed. She was asleep. She had been awake for 3 days straight during the battle. Someone had draped a jacket over her shoulders and left a container of water beside her. Even in sleep, her hands were curled as if they were still gripping flight controls. I saw Frank Ellison, the retired merchant sailor, shaking hands with a human naval officer who had fought alongside him during the battle. They were strangers. They had never met before Arathis 4. They clasped hands and Frank said, "Good flying out there." And the naval officer said, "Right back at you, old man." And they both laughed with the easy warmth of people who had been through something together and come out the other side. I saw the colonists of Arathis 4, the farmers and engineers and teachers who had started this entire chain of events by refusing to surrender on that first night, standing on the surface of their battered world and looking up at the sky. She was thin and tired, and there were dark circles under her eyes, but she was standing, and when a shuttle from the civilian fleet landed nearby, and its crew stepped out, she walked forward and embraced the first person she saw, a complete stranger who had crossed the void to help her. That embrace. I keep returning to it. Two humans who had never met, holding each other on the scorched earth of a colony that had refused to fall. It was not a gesture of victory, it was a gesture of recognition. You came. I am here. We survived this together. I thought about what Okafor had said. We want neighbors, not subjects. I thought about Lucy Ward's calm eyes and her story about the soldiers at the narrow pass. And I understood. Finally, completely, I understood. The Draveni had looked at humanity and seen a weak species. Soft bodies. No natural weapons. Fragile. Emotional. Irrational. We had measured them by our standards and found them lacking. We had come to Arathis 4 expecting prey. We had found something else entirely. They are not frightening because of their military. They are all of those things, yes, but those are symptoms, not the cause. The cause is something deeper, something that lives in the space between a farmer's refusal to surrender and a stranger's decision to cross the stars to help. Something that connects a retired schoolteacher holding a switch in a cellar to a young pilot threading through a battle she was never trained for. Something that makes an entire species stand up, all at once, and say no. Humans have several: solidarity, compassion, stubbornness, love. They are all the same thing in the end. They are the reason that when you hurt one human, you do not face one human in response. You face all of them. Every single one. The soldiers and the civilians and the old and the young and the frightened and the brave. All of them, standing together, because that is what they are. That is what they have always been. A species that does not leave its own behind. I am filing this report as my final act as a Draveni military officer. I have included all tactical data, all sensor recordings, all communications logs, and all personal observations from the Arathis campaign. I have filed it at the highest classification level, and I have requested that it be distributed to every fleet commander, every sector governor, and every member of the Imperial Council. My recommendation is simple. Do not fight the humans. Behind every fleet is a species that does not abandon its own. You will not be fighting their military, you will be fighting their nature. And their nature does not surrender. I intend to spend the rest of my career ensuring that no Draveni officer is foolish enough to test humanity again. If this report saves even one Draveni life by preventing another conflict with the humans, then the 60 soldiers we lost on that first night, and the thousands we lost after, will not have fallen for nothing. To any Draveni reading this, I leave you with a final thought. A human once told me that you do not have to win a fight, you just have to make it cost more than it is worth. We attacked a farming colony of 800 people. It cost us the Grand Fleet, the Throne of Scales, a Grand Admiral, and the illusion of invincibility that had sustained our empire for 3 millennia.